Master Victor Newsruev, and we start our regular webinar, and this time we are going to talk about how to trap pieces. So guys, please let me know if the sound and video quality is good. So I put my microphone closer, that's why everything should be fine. Okay, perfect. So please look at this position and tell me if you found how white gains the material here. If you found it yourself. Of course, that was also posted in the webinar invitation. So what was the solution of this position? Who knows? Okay, fine. So I'm sure you solved this position yourself. No, it's not a3, it's queen a4, because if you play a3, they can escape to a5 with their bishop. So let me show you. If only you play a3 in this position, they escape to a5 with the bishop, then what? b4, but bishop escapes to b6. Here, to be able to gain these two bishops for a rook, we should play queen a4. This bishop has no squares to escape, but what they can do? First of all, they can capture our rook, we capture the bishop, we are down the exchange, but this bishop on b4 is still trapped. a5, a3, but actually we are not threatening to take. However, maybe we may take and then capture on a8. In the game, and this is actually the game between Evgeny Bareev and Sergei Volkov, it was played rook e8, after which white decided to play queen d1, and black realized that the bishop is almost trapped. Oh yeah, right now we are threatening already to take it. They played e4, bishop retreats, and then c6, but after a takes b4, a takes b4, and bishop d2, white is absolutely winning. Oh, they played a few more moves. Actually, this is move number 18, and the game ended after move number 35. However, from this position it's obvious that white is winning. According to the engine evaluation, it's +2 and 3, which means absolutely winning on Grandmaster's level. Okay, fine. So today we are going to talk about how to trap pieces. What do you know about it? Well, if you have any suggestions of the algorithm to follow to be able to trap enemy pieces, please share it. If you don't know anything about trapping the pieces, then I'll definitely explain how do I realize that it's time to trap piece and which piece to trap. Okay, so Peter suggests a good idea to eliminate escape squares of the piece and then attack it. Yes, but actually it is too slow. When you see that the piece has a lot of squares to escape and you are trying to eliminate some of them first, your opponent can simply notice it and do something, disrupt your plan, and let his other piece to escape. Okay. Parallax also suggests that we should be looking for the pieces that are not supported by other pieces. Now, Yeah, and the best MVP, look for undefended pieces and set traps. Oh, setting traps is always good if these traps are good traps. You know, there is a difference between good and bad traps. How to realize if the trap is good or not? Well, first of all, when you create a threat, you should understand that even if your opponent doesn't get into this trap, your position is still okay and is not worse than it was before. So this is a good trap. When you set a trap, your opponent doesn't get into it and you are still fine. This is a good trap. A bad trap is that, for example, you create a trap, your opponent doesn't get into this trap and your position gets worse or even losing. This is an example of a bad trap. I'm trying to do usually only good traps and bad traps if only I believe that this is my last chance to get him into a trap, otherwise the game is lost. So, okay. Let me switch to another position. Okay. So setting traps probably is a good idea, yes, but it should be a good trap. What else? What else to be looking for? Okay, so just a sec. Well, maybe we'll wait for more answers. I just want you to know that this webinar is recording. I'm not sure if there is recording will be available, but it will be definitely available on in our educational group on chess.com at Tricks of Chess Group. This is the link. So the webinar will be available for a few days, maybe even for more days after today. Okay, so another good point about bad traps. So people try to set bad traps because their opponents usually get trapped and they just want to take a chance of the opponent to get into the trap because they expect that their opponent is a bad player. At first it may help, but when you are going to face with and play with stronger players, they will definitely notice your bad trap, and if so, you'll get into trouble in such a case. So what do I recommend? I don't recommend making the moves hoping for a mistake. So this is not the way how you may get better. So if you see that you can set a trap and he is likely to get into it according to what you think, but at the same time there is no guarantee that he gets trapped, and after he successfully passes this trap, your position will be worse, then you shouldn't do it. You'd better find a better move that improves your position, or at least doesn't change. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to, maybe it's not the algorithm, but just a hint. Every time when you are going, or when you decide if, okay, so every time I want you to pay attention to the enemy pieces. Sometimes you may notice that the enemy piece has just a few squares to escape. Not a lot of them, but just a few. And if so, only then it makes sense to eliminate these squares, or to attack the piece directly and attack these squares after that. So first you should realize that this piece has just a few squares to move to, and then you should be looking of how can I trap this piece. For example, in this position it was black to move because the rook is under attack. Knight d3 was played. What do you think black played? And actually tell me what would you play in this position if you were black. Rook b8. Why not? Rook b5. No. Okay. Rook d4. Okay. Parallax suggests rook d4. And okay, tell me please, what can you say about the rook on d4? How many squares does the rook on d4 have? Okay, while you're thinking about the answer for this question, I'll tell you that the best move is rook b5. Trying to attack the pawn, then probably what? Rook c4, then maybe rook a4, or just rook c4, b4, a4. And of course white is playing for a win, but they would play for many moves, and I believe practically black would have a chance to fight for a draw in this position. But rook d4 was played. The rook gets centralized, and that was probably the logic of a black player who was actually a grandmaster. But the point is that the rook doesn't have any squares to escape. None. Okay, and now I suggest you to find, I want you to find a move for white that can take the advantage of the rook being in the center. No. Okay, if white's to move here, white would just capture on d4. So the rook moved, and now I want you to take the advantage of the rook being in the center. Knight f4. No, knight f4 looks attractive. However, if you play such a move, they will probably react with king f6. King f6? Or king f7? Oh, let's say king f6. Oh, yeah, king of 6. That's right. Let's make this move on the board, moves on the board. So king f6 or f7. Let's say f6. What happens then? No, when the knight was on d3, taken there means king e5. So the rook is protected. So now, of course, we don't capture because black doesn't capture because black doesn't want to take on d4. So what should we play as white in this position? The king gets to f6. How to continue? Knight d5 check. Wait a sec. Knight d5, c takes d5. What are we talking about? c6, knight b6, and I'm okay to sacrifice the knight for that pawn. No, black will at least sacrifice the knight. Okay, rook f2 was another suggestion, and this move looks attractive, but this move allows black to get some flexibility. They can play rook d1. So looks like there is no good discovered attack except knight h5. But after knight h5, just king e7, and the knight now is trapped. The only square it can move to is g7. But how to escape with such a knight? While black is going to play this move, rook d4 back and capture on e4. We're also threatening with this. And maybe not rook d4, but at least rook e1. So I would say even black is better. Knight f4, king f6, and then you said knight e2, but I can still play rook d1. What's the point of knight e2? So knight f4 can be played, but it's not the best move. White played in this position rook d2. Who can tell me why rook d2 is the best option and what is our threat right now? Knight e5 now? No, knight e5 they take on d2. Okay, so yeah, right now we are threatening with knight f4. If they take, king captures rook. If they don't take but move the king, then rook takes d4, it takes d4, king takes d4, white gains the second extra pawn, and it's completely winning with no chances at all. So that's why in the game it was played king f6 actually. Yeah, king f6. So but what if king e7? What do you think we can do now? Knight takes e5. Yeah, now you are absolutely right. Knight takes e5. So if knight takes knight, rook takes rook. So that's why rook takes d2, but knight c6 is an intermediate check, and after this check the king can't attack this knight. The king has to go maybe here. Then king takes d2, knight takes c5, but king e3, protecting the pawn, and the pawn on a7 is the object of the attack. Maybe a6, but still two extra pawns for white and a completely winning position. Okay, that's right. No, black realized that. That's why they played king f6. What can you say? How to continue now? Because if now you play knight e5, they just play king takes e5. Oh, sorry. If now you play knight e5, they play rook d2. And there is no intermediate check. If you take on d7, then rook takes knight and white loses. How to play now? Okay, so for those who joined us recently, we are talking about how to trap enemy pieces and analyzing this position from Grandmaster's games. The rook on d4 is trapped, but how to take the advantage of this rook having just a few squares to escape. No, actually, no squares to escape. And I think the best insight from this webinar is that you should be looking for pieces that don't have a lot of squares to escape. Either no squares or just a few. Because this is how it will be easier for you to trap them. And only then you should be looking for how exactly to trap, how to create a trap and trap these pieces. So king f6, what did you suggest here? No suggestions. Rook f2. Yeah, rook f2, exactly. Rook f2. Then, if king e7, still knight e5 works. King e6, knight f4 works. And then what? If the king goes there, then g6 is lost with the temper. If the king goes to the f file, then we can just apply the discovered attack and gain the exchange, so white will be absolutely winning. Okay, this is a good example that illustrates that black would better play rook b5, so keep the rook on the b file, which is a closed file, instead of centralizing the rook. How they could realize that it's quite risky to put the rook to the center? They should look at the squares where this rook can escape after it goes to d4. If there are no such squares, then they should pay attention to the variation which allows white to trap this rook. So to knight f4 moves and rook d2. Both options should be analyzed by black before deciding to move the rook to the center. And every time you put the rook to a place where it has just a few squares to escape, you take a risk, and that decision should be well calculated. Okay, now the next position that I'm going to talk that I would like to show. So here, black to move. What do you think black should play? If we calculate the number of pawns, then I say it's equal, but these two are hanging. So what black should do to be able to play, to try to gain the advantage? Or maybe should they just equalize? What do you think? And it was white. It was Robert Fontaine playing for white and Evgeny Nair playing for black. So a black player was even 100 points stronger than the white one. Okay, so Parallax suggests queen g5. But the problem of queen g5 is that this queen takes the e4, it opens the center, and white can later take the advantage of their bishop pair. So this is where white is slightly better. Anything else you can suggest? Bishop b4. Yeah, I would say yes. Bishop b4 works. So bishop b4, then what? Maybe h4 to support. Black develops their pieces like that. However, maybe knight d7. a3. Now let's say bishop takes. It's not obligatory, but let's say they take. Queen takes. If queen takes, then king takes. It's fine. Here the bishop is better than the knight, and e4 is a weakness. If, let's say, queen f5, then the queen becomes the object of the attack. For example, black castles and continue the attack on this queen. Yeah, white will be just slightly better, and bishop b4 I think is the best move. Moving the queen back means to lose the pawn for nothing. That's why black decided that queen f5 is probably the best option. But when the queen is on f5, it has just a few squares to escape. In this position, only these two. What do you think white should do to be able to take the advantage of this queen having just a few squares? 2 squares, to be precise. So, what do you think? Bishop g2. Bishop g2 maybe. What then? Let's see. Bishop g5. You capture on e4. I move my queen to f6. Maybe, but there is no strong advantage for white. Rook b1. What's the point of rook b1? Bishop h2. Okay, now another line. Rook h3 and rook g1 with bishop g4 coming. But then just rook h4 protecting the g4 square. h4, bishop g5 right now. However, maybe it's not so bad. h4, bishop takes g5 and bishop h3. Then queen f3, of course, attacking here, and h4 is hanging. So black is winning here. Now h4, it doesn't look good. Okay. What else? No ideas? Okay, guys, here f4 is the best move. Now please explain why. Why f4? f4, of course, protects on g5. But what we should analyze before playing f4? Yeah, en passant, it takes f3. No, it takes f3, queen f5, then g takes f5, I think. Or king f2. No, but it's fine. Black is okay. Black captures one more pawn. And g5 is still hanging. Maybe after e takes f3 we may play better. What do you think? This is actually a very sneaky move that allows white to attack all the squares where black queen could escape. Okay, let me show you. E takes f3, then e4. And now we see the g5 is unavailable because the bishop. With this move, we also attack the queen. And the f3 square is occupied with their own piece. Of course, you may say they can play f2, but after f2, just king e2. And f3 is still unavailable. The queen is trapped in the center. That's why it was so risky to play queen a5, queen f5 from a5. Because after f4, the queen has no squares. The pawn is protected, and en passant loses the queen immediately. In the game, it was knight a6 played. How to continue? Because we did trap the queen. The only other task is to attack it. How would you play? Bishop to g2. Yeah, exactly. Bishop g2. If, let's say, knight b4 in this position, we shouldn't take. We don't want to get this extra check. Just move the queen to b1. And if knight d3, how would you play? king e2 or not. If you play king e2, they can do, no, the e4 is protected. King e2, maybe bishop b4 can be played. Bishop takes bishop, knight takes bishop, bishop e4, queen escapes. Okay, what else? What else? King e2. No, maybe something like that. And if bishop e4, queen takes d3, queen g2 is a check, the rook is hanging. Yeah, so no, not king e2. Can you suggest anything else? Instead of king e2. King f1. Okay, guys, actually no. Queen takes d3, and after e takes d3, e4. The queen is trapped. We sacrifice the queen for a knight, but the enemy queen will be captured just for a pawn. So bishop b4 was played instead. a3. Bishop takes here, king takes d2. And what is the only way to get the queen escape from this position? e5, that's right. But after bishop e4, queen e6 and f takes e5, white is completely winning with 2 extra pawns. Maybe black will be able to gain one, but there will be no compensation for the second. Okay, let's go back to the very beginning, to queen f5 move. So you see, with queen f5, the queen has just a few squares to escape. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't play such moves, but these moves should be well calculated. Here, black just means that there is the f4 move, which protects the pawn, and passant doesn't work. And the white plan is to capture on e4 for free, after which the queen is trapped. Okay, the third position that we are going to talk about is this one. So white wants to pressure on the c file here, but we are black and it's our turn to play. What do you think black should do? What's your opinion? So looks like there is a lot of pressure on the c6 square, and they are likely to take, maybe then just move the knight somewhere and the pawn will be hanging. I think this is the main problem for black in this position. How can we solve it? Of course, if we can. No ideas? Okay, guys, I think you have the ideas, but can I show the problem? Okay, I can. So let's say which move. Oh, I don't know. Let's say a6. Take knight a4, and this pawn is hanging, and looks like there is nothing they can do. Rook b8 maybe. Rook b8, queen c2. Still threatening there. Oh, queen c2 is unavailable, sorry. Queen d1. And then c6 is still hanging. That's the main problem. So knight a5 was suggested. Knight a5, queen a4, and the knight becomes the object of the attack. So knight d5 is coming, which opens to discovered attack on the queen, of course, and on the knight on a5. So that's why I don't recommend this move. a6, bishop d3, for example, and if b5, then knight b5 works perfectly. Because after a takes b5, rook takes there, and if they take the queen, then white takes on a7. Black will be a pawn down in such a case. So knight e5 doesn't work. But knight e5 works. If white captures, black just gains the pawn. That's why white should be looking for something aggressive to ruin black plan, which is of course knight d5. How would you play then? So if we just retreat with the queen, they take on e7, queen takes on e7, and after d takes e5, black is down a pawn, at least. So what do you suggest? I believe this variation requires calculations. Knight takes d5. Knight takes d5, rook c7, knight takes c7, d takes e5, and what? Black lost queen and the pawn and the knight, and gained 2 knights plus a rook. So actually it's in white favor. White is +2. I mean queen plus pawn for knight and rook. No, knight takes d5 is definitely in white favor. What else can be done? Okay, while you are thinking, today there will be almost no self-promotion. If you want, you can send me a friend request on chess.com. So this is how you won't be able to miss any our future announcements and my new videos that I'm going to publish on YouTube. Also, you need to friend me if you are going to participate in the simul. By the way, it looks like there are just a few attendees today. So what happened? Last time it was 10 people more. Today it's only 16. So maybe today is the holiday in the United States. Of course not, I am just joking. I know it's not. Okay. Let's continue. here, first, black should sacrifice the queen. Then bishop takes, of course. Then knight takes d5. What then? Here, now it's white who has to play properly. They have to play a certain move, because if only they do a logical move, d takes a5, they lose immediately. Who can tell me why white loses in this position? Who knows? Rook c8, yeah, exactly. We are threatening with rook c8. Which rook to c8? Doesn't really matter, but let's say rook a c8. Then the bishop is under attack. And if they just move the bishop, we can trap the queen. So let's say this move, bishop c2, and the queen gets trapped. Because the queen was that piece that just have a few squares to escape. And all these squares are on the same diagonal, what means that only with the bishop we can attack them, as well as the queen. So, how to play? Queen d1. Oh, and maybe bishop c4 as well. Let's calculate this line. Then knight b6 just. And if bishop moves, then still bishop c2. Or actually, if bishop moves, we can do rook c1. Up to you. So, queen d1. Then, still bishop c2. Now the queen, of course, escapes. Where? No, d2, bishop b4. If queen goes to e2, then bishop d3, and we are threatening to take on c1. For example, queen d1 back, but bishop takes b5, and that's it. Enough material compensation for the queen. They played queen d4. They could play queen d4, which is the best, and then bishop d3 still threatens to take on c1 as well as on b5. So bishop d3, rook c1, king moves, rook h1, and in this position it's a lot. Rook plus 2 rooks plus knight versus queen. Black is completely winning. So how to play? King d1 maybe. What can you say about king d1? Now bishop c2 doesn't look good because queen takes, rook takes, king takes, and black is a pawn down. What do you think? How to continue this position? Rook f d8, joining more pieces into the attack. Bishop d2, bishop b4, bishop a4, and now we take and simply move the knight somewhere, and then you realize that the king has actually no squares to escape. The only one is e1, but then it's up to you. Take on g2, rook c1 probably is the best. Yeah, rook c1. Yeah, rook c1 forces them to sacrifice the queen. Knight b4? No, knight f4 is better. Okay, so d takes e5 doesn't work in this position. It loses after rook a or rook f to c8. What do you think white should do to be able to save their position? What do you think? Bishop d2 or castles? Wait, no, bishop d2, the knight just escapes and black has more than enough material compensation for the queen. One knight, 2 knights plus a rook versus queen. versus queen and the pawn, but anyway, it's in black favor. So no, bishop d2 or castling doesn't work. What else do you think may work? Okay, so queen c1, bishop c1, knight takes d5, and how to play in this position. Okay, so e4. Yeah, e4. Why e4? Because it allows the queen to escape. So bishop takes e4, d takes d5 now, and rook ac8 doesn't work in this position. If, let's say, we play such a move, they just castle. And if only we play bishop c2, the queen escapes to g3. Or f3, or h3. That's why, after this move, just bishop g2, rook g1, and bishop e4. Let's now compare the material. So it's rook plus knight plus pawn for the queen. Looks materially equal, but let's compare the pieces' activity. The knight on d5 is really perfect piece. It's located so active that restricts enemy pieces' activity, while the bishops are good as well. Black can also pressure through the open files. So here it's white who has to fight for a draw, actually. White has bishop h6. No, white doesn't have such a move because of bishop g6 at least. Then the bishop is hanging. Same thing with queen g3. Just bishop g6 and that's it. This is how white has to fight for a draw, and actually the result of, the reason of this tactical strike was white undeveloped. If only they were castled, then knight e5 wouldn't work. Never. So they did the right thing, but knight e5 was played too early. Instead, they'd better castle first and then play knight e5, or take on c6 and play knight e5 after that to pressure the weakness on c6. Okay, fine. So here actually it's not if only you try to find which piece can be trapped, you can't realize that this is the queen in this position. From this position it's not obvious, but you should be calculating logical lines, and of course knight takes knight is a logical line. And then after knight d5 you may see that if only you trade the queen for the rook and the knight, your position will be quite active, and you could take the advantage of enemy could take the advantage of bad enemy pieces, such as the bishop on c1 that becomes the object of the attack, and the queen on b3 that can be easily trapped with bishop c2. So the task was to notice this move, and only after you notice it, that this is a move with a temper, you could realize that the queen has actually just a few squares to escape, and bishop c2 traps it. So what originally happened in the game? It was e4, bishop a4, d takes e4, bishop g2, rook g1, bishop e4, and they continued playing it for about 20 more moves. And the game finally ended in a draw, but it was white who made the draw. Actually, this is the game between Predrag Nikolic, 26-25, and Alexander Halefman, 26-60. So both players were strong grandmasters. Okay, the next position that we are going to talk about, actually for some reason it doesn't show the rating and the names of players, but it should. Let me refresh the page. Here it shows. And so it's the game between Edward Meduna and Yuri Kovic. So white to move. What do you think? Which piece is almost trapped and has just a few squares to escape? And after you answer this question, please suggest a move. So it's the queen and you suggest bishop to d2 move. What happens if you play such a move? Okay, let's analyze. Well, the queen can move to d4 and c4. Let's say the queen moves to c4. How do you play then? Then the queen can escape to b5, so I don't really see how the queen can be trapped after bishop d2. Okay, so maybe now you should follow the principle that Peter told us in the very beginning of the webinar. Something about eliminating the squares that are available for the piece that we want to trap. And of course you're right, this is the queen that we would like to trap in this position. Also, I want you to pay attention to this pin that works and that doesn't allow them to capture on d3. It's quite important. So instead of bishop d2, what can you suggest? Okay, queen h5 doesn't work in this position. Then bishop g6 or g6 with the pawn. There is no kingside attack, actually. So the queen is trapped, and I want you to eliminate the squares where the queen can potentially move. No, keeper suggests rook a4. Yeah, rook a4, exactly. Not a5, but a4. So to prevent the queen from escaping to these two squares. This is how we also cover a5, which was already covered, but it's important to not allow the queen to move there. What happens then? Of course, our next move is bishop d2. And there is nothing they can do. Can you suggest anything for black? Well, while you're thinking, I can show what happens in case of bishop e7, for example. Bishop d2, and the queen is trapped. Queen goes to c4, which is the best option. D takes c4 and knight c5 in this position. This is how, of course, we sacrifice. But then queen h5, bishop g6 here allows us to capture on c5. That's why g6 with the pawn. Queen escapes to e2, These two pawns are weaknesses, and actually there is no compensation for the queen. No, black has rook plus bishop plus one pawn for the queen, but of course the pawn on either c4 or e4 dies immediately on the next move, for example. So bishop e7 didn't work. King f7 was played. Still bishop d2. Queen c4, rook takes c4, d takes c4, and knight e5 was played. So who can tell me what's the idea of knight e5 move? Why do we sacrifice the knight in this way? So the idea of such a sacrifice is to play queen h5. First queen h5, or maybe first, okay, queen h5, g6, queen e2, and then same thing we capture on c4. Or we can play queen e2 immediately. Rook d5 protecting there, but queen c4. And this is what happened in the game actually. Bishop e7, bishop c3, attacking on e5, rook b8, take on e5, but rook b4, forcing our queen to move out of this diagonal, but queen c3 and the bishop is still protected. Bishop f8, and what do you think was the last move of the game after which black resigned? Who can tell me? Yeah, so here the bishop on f8 is overloaded. That's why we can just capture on g7, and after bishop g7 take on b4, and absolutely winning position, no compensation for the queen. If they don't but move the bishop to e7, for example, here we have a lot of material. It's a queen plus two pawns versus rook and the bishop. Actually, it was easy to notice that here the queen is the piece that can be trapped, because the queen has just a few squares to escape. They all are located on the same rank, so that's why we can cover both by playing rook a4. So this is the move that you should analyze first. Okay, I also have two more positions to analyze with you today, and this is the fragment from the game between Anatoly Karpov and Jan Rogers. What can you say? Now I want you to do the whole part of such exercise. So what can you tell me about the enemy pieces, about black pieces? Which of them have just a few squares to escape and can be potentially trapped? What's your opinion? The queen has c7 and d8. No, that's right. The queen has just two squares to escape. Can we trap the queen? Oh, or maybe we can if only we move the bishop to a5. Somehow rook a3 maybe and bishop a5, but it looks too slow. Black king is weak. No, not really, not at the moment, but potentially if we play g6, maybe yes. However, g6 right now doesn't work. Okay, so only the bishop can be trapped. That's right. How to trap this bishop? Actually, to be able to do that, we may just move our dark squared bishop away. Bishop d2 or bishop e1. Let's say bishop e1. This is what was played in the game. What then? We are threatening with c4, of course. c4, which allows us either play c5 or take on d5, anything. So they took on e5. What do you think? How should we continue? Should we take with the rook? Should we take with the pawn or what? Okay, let's go back and cover c5 move. c5 right now leads to knight d7, king d7, and d takes c5. Queen has to take, otherwise they lose the material. And I believe this is a completely winning position. What is the next move that white should play? Bishop b4, exactly. It's bishop b4, then queen escapes. At least bishop d6 looks good. But I think we should play better. Rook c3, attacking them first. Queen moves there. No, it doesn't really matter where. But every time the queen moves, they blunder on d5 because of this pin. So let's say queen moves there. But rook d5 still works. The bishop is protected, and we are threatening to take on d6. That's right. So c5 is actually a bad idea. They have to capture on e5. d takes e5. Knight f5, attacking our rook. What do you think? Can we play c4 to trap the bishop, or we should save the rook? Because you see, if we play c4, they take there, and they capture on e3 with a check, and we may also lose the pawn on e5. So taking on e3 is quite risky. I mean, we shouldn't allow black to capture our rook on e3. What do you think we may play instead? Still c4 doesn't work. What else? Rook a3? Why not? Rook h3 was played in the game, but I think there is no big difference between rook a3 or rook h3. And we threaten with this move. If, for example, they play c5, what do you think we can do? Queen e4? What for? Queen a4, king a7, let's say, or queen a4, bishop c6. Of course not. Okay, guys, here we can just play rook takes d5. And if they take, we have two bishops for a rook. And in this position, it means absolutely winning. So that's why after rook h3 they castled c4, but queen c5, trying to pin the c4 pawn. So what should we do? Do we have enough time to play king b1 or not? What do you think? Because of bishop e4. Yeah, king b1 and bishop e4 looks good. But yeah, bishop e4, and if we take, we blunder there. Instead of bishop e4, bishop c4 works as well. Then if bishop c4, then rook d1, and the king gets distracted and can't protect on c4 anymore. If first rook takes rook, then in case of queen c4, while black trades the queens off and finally deliver a check there to take on e1. If bishop takes there, then rook d4 immediately, fork, and the c4 bishop dies. King b1 is a mistake. If king b1 doesn't work, what should we do? What do you think? b4, that's right, b4. If now the queen moves, we capture on d5. They played bishop f3, attacking the queen. So rook takes d8, rook takes rook, and after queen f3, queen e5, they don't have, no, bishop c3 is the next move. They don't have compensation for the bishop. They don't have enough compensation. It's only one pawn. They played queen d6, bishop d3, trying to simplify, knight d4. Here white decided to take on f7, why not? Knight f5 and just bishop f5 because there is no checkmate. Queen d1, king b2, and no more checks. Rook d2 doesn't work, bishop takes, and bishop c2 then. Queen e4 was the last move, and after rook e3, black resigned. Well, of course, it's obvious. If they take with the queen, they trade the queens off. It's completely losing endgame. If they take with the pawn, they blunder bishop e5, and white can fork on white can checkmate on c7. Okay, so look at this position again. Here, the bishop on d5 has just a few squares to escape. And c5 opens the position which is not in black favor, while their king is in the center and they have too many pieces hanging on the d file. That's why we may take the advantage of the bishop being there and play this move to trap it. Okay, one more thing I want to ask. What if bishop a2? What if they try to escape this way? What is the other thing that we should pay attention to? Should we play b3 in this position and then try to trap the king with our trap the bishop with our king? What do you think? Yes, parallax is correct. It's rook a3, double attack, and this is the second threat. So one threat, the other threat. And then they lose the bishop. Okay, fine. So the other game I would like to show you is this one, the game between Efim Geller and Vasily Smyslov. What do you think about this position? It's white to move, what white should do. Let's try to analyze it. So white has a bishop pair, but the knight on d5 blocks white piece's activity. However, maybe the knight on a4 is out of the game because it's almost trapped. But we can't attack it. What do you think we should do if we still would like to capture this bishop on a4? So c4, should we play c4 in this position? c4 and passant, and if you play b3, knight b2, right, or not? b3, knight c3, of course. Oh wait, c4 is an interesting move. c4, b takes c3, then what? B takes c3, then maybe rook d8. If b3 in this position, then knight a b6 works. So they escape. Okay, yeah, Nona Keeper suggests a really good idea to play a3, because if they take, we can play b3. That's not the end, of course. Okay, a3. If they play a5, then of course we can trap them with this move, and the knight is lost. If they just play bishop b7, no, of course the pawn is protected, right? So then we take, they take, and b3 traps the knight. However, in the game they decided to capture on a3, and in this position b3 doesn't work. Why this move doesn't work? Who knows? No, of course, here the answer is obvious. Not knight b6, because if so, they attack our other knight, no black other knight. But if they play knight c3, then they are protected. So rook d3 probably, but knight escapes to the center or to b5, depends on them. That's why not b3, but rook a1, to capture with the rook and still attack this knight. What if, for example, bishop d7 move? What do you think? How to take the advantage of bishop d7 move? The idea is obvious. They wanted to protect on a4, but maybe we can do something else. Rook a3, then they have enough time to escape, I believe. Actually no, rook a3 looks good, but instead just b3. And if knight c3, just take, because they can't take, the bishop is hanging. So they didn't play bishop d7, of course. They took on b2, as many of you suggested. Rook db1, and the next move is rook a3, after which the knight is absolutely trapped. What do you think they can play to be able to save their position? What's your opinion? Knight b3 for knight c2. What do you mean? Knight b4. Yeah, knight b4, exactly. This is not the best move, because after rook a3, knight c2, rook a2, two of them are under the attack. Knight d4, knight takes d4, and what? This knight still can't escape. Instead, they could just play this move, e5, then knight e5, and knight b4 now. Because after rook a3, knight takes c2, this bishop is hanging, so we have to capture here with the bishop, but they play knight a3 and gain the exchange. So here we have two minor pieces versus rook and pawn. Oh, rook e8, f4. White is better, but it's not a winning position. They would have to play, and maybe black will get some drawing chances later. If bishop takes e5, which I believe is better, then knight b4 doesn't look good. But maybe knight b6 works, because if only we do rook a3, they escape to c4, which is a fork. So that's why in this position we have to play something like that and hope that they move the rook. If such a case, we can capture on a3 with our bishop. But they can still escape to c4. Bishop c5. Knight d7, attacking our bishop. Bishop d4, knight d6. So they retreated, but we have a bishop pair in the open position. This is what could allow them to save the e5 move, which they didn't notice, and just played knight a4. Rook takes a3, and bishop d7. Okay, please tell me how to continue, how to gain the material here. What would you play if you were white? c4, that's right, c4, to trap the knight, to get rid of this knight. So knight goes, knight played f4 in the game, but let's say, what if knight e7? If so, you can simply do this, rook d8, and just take there and get two minor pieces for a rook. If the knight goes to f4, then you can also get two minor pieces for a rook if only you play rook b4. f6, and you take there. So white gets a bishop pair and the pass pawn on the c file, which decides the game. They of course continued, but white was completely winning. I'll just show you the plan. So you see, activating move the pawn and activated the bishop, trading pieces, and then the c pawn is a good passed pawn here. Before, and the d5 pawn dies. a5, and this is where they resigned, probably after knight c7 move. Okay, so this game, this position was quite complicated and required a lot of calculation here, but first of all, you could notice that the knight on the edge has just a few squares to escape, has actually no squares to escape. The main task was just to realize how to attack this knight to capture finally. And here only one solution worked: a3 and rook a1. No b3, because this is how we allow them to escape to c3. If only we could chase this knight first and then attack the other one, it would be much more simple. Okay guys, so that's all that I prepared for today, and actually I'm a little bit disappointed that there were just a few attendees. So next webinar, I believe I'll make a simul. I'm going to play maybe 10 games simultaneously. You are welcome to join. I will make an announcement, and I'll be waiting for you to participate. We will be playing on chess.com. So do you have any questions? And while you are thinking about the questions, let me summarize everything that you may learn from this webinar. First of all, if you would like to trap enemy pieces, you should be looking at pieces that has just a few squares to escape. And second, of course, you should calculate of how exactly you trap them. And please don't set bad traps. These are such traps when if your opponent doesn't get trapped, your position gets worse. So only good traps. In case if your opponent doesn't get into this trap, your position is still fine. Okay, thank you for your attention, and hope to see you on Sunday. And it will be really great if you could invite more friends to come to our next webinar. Okay, thank you, and hope to see you soon.